counseling and psychological service. They offer individual and group services to any registered student at UNL. International students, that means you too. Just call your University Health Center on City Campus anytime Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. The services are easy and confidential, and the best part is the first 3 sessions are free. Go online at health.unl.edu/caps.
This is Logan.
What's up, everyone?
Logan's been going to UNL for 4 years now.
I know everything that's going on here.
Logan is somewhat informed about campus events.
Like the football game, and I think there's some kind of election, I think.
Don't be like Logan. Pick up a copy of the Daily Nebraskan or follow them on Facebook and Twitter. Not only can you be updated with events on campus, you can read profiles on some of the most interesting people around Lincoln and get unique coverage found nowhere else, because keeping up with the news is one of the most important things a student can do.
What are you still doing with all those old t-shirts that don't even fit anymore? Why not get rid of them by donating them to Goodwill of Lincoln? Goodwill of Lincoln is a not-for-profit organization that takes nearly any household item and item of clothing. Its main mission is willing workers employed and community resources maximized. Goodwill also provides a safe environment for people with mental, physical, and emotional disabilities to be employed. So what are you still doing with those t-shirts? Your freshman 15 is less noticeable in a slightly bigger shirt anyway. Donate the small ones to Goodwill of Lincoln. To contact Goodwill of Lincoln, go to lincolngoodwill.org.
Back with you live on Huskers Hoops Live, officially now on the Huskers Hoops Live YouTube channel. Had a couple of technical difficulties there, but we are up and running on 90.3 KRNU and the Huskers Hoops Live YouTube channel. Let's continue to break down this Nebraska basketball week. We've got the Northwestern game now. The Huskers did a great job recovering from a 2-game losing skid against Iowa on the road. You've got Rutgers on the road, just kind of some unfortunate games recently for Nebraska, and they return home and are able to take down Northwestern 75-69. And Northwestern is a team that ever since I've been on campus has been kind of a thorn in Coach Hoiberg's side. They continued to just take Nebraska down, even when there was hype that they could maybe pull it off over the past few years. And for kind of a surprising finish to this game, Nebraska was actually able to hold out and get the job done in a very important win. You get, I believe, win number 14 on the year for the Huskers. It's in front of nearly 15,000 people on an alumni weekend where you bring in a lot of historic Husker players to honor them at halftime. So kind of cool to see that the Huskers were able to get this done. And something I kind of underplayed in the Rutgers breakdown was Juwan Gary ended up getting injured in that game late in that one, and it was thought potentially that he was going to be out for quite a bit of time, potentially even the rest of the season, as we are now into late January, and there's only really a couple of months left until we're into the postseason. But it did come out that Juwan could return a lot sooner than everyone thought, as it was just a calf strain, I believe, for Juwan, but he was not available for this Northwestern game. So in comes Josiah Alec into the starting lineup, the Lincoln kid. And folks, he had one of his best games of the season against Northwestern, who's a very, very solid team. Two Big Ten teams coming into this one that now Northwestern sits at 4-3 in the conference after losing to Nebraska. But they were 13-4 coming into this one in Lincoln, and Josiah Alec really balled out for his standards. 15 points, something you don't often see from Josiah. Doesn't get as many of the shots to get to that scoring total a lot of the times, but he added 5 rebounds. He was diving for loose balls into the bench, just kind of that crazy energy guy that you're used to seeing from Josiah, but he added on to that with those points that Nebraska really needed in support of Juwan Gary being unavailable in the lineup. So big shout out to Josiah Alec for helping the Huskers finish this one off against Northwestern. I think he had 10 of his points in the first half too. So he really, like right out of the tunnel, he was there to put a big performance together for Nebraska. But The Huskers only had 8 players on the court in this game, as the depth was not there as much as usual just because of that injury to Juwan Gary. You've got Blaze Keita, who was anticipated to be potentially active, but didn't end up playing any minutes in this ball game. So that Huskers front court was really, really kind of not available as much as you would like to see. I mean, there was somebody like a Matar Diop you could have put in. He got some late minutes in the Rutgers game in overtime, ended up having the assist, I believe, to Sam Hoiberg for one of his threes. But you've got somebody like Eli Rice playing over 8 minutes in this one. Didn't take a shot, but he did hit all 4 of his free throws off the bench. But he was really the only front court member off the bench for Nebraska that even played. You've got Rink Mast playing 32 minutes. Josiah played 24. Nebraska had to play a lot of small ball in this one. Sam Hoiberg played almost 22 minutes off the bench, only took 1 shot. Talk about knowing your role on a roster. Big props to Sam Hoiberg to be such a team player like that and know what his coach wants the team to do and know that he doesn't want to go out there and just be out there for himself. So kind of an interesting way to go against Northwestern too, because they have a guy in Matthew Nicholson who your eye is immediately drawn to him when you see him on the court. He is quite a big guy. He came off the bench in this one, played 27 minutes, because you imagine the Northwestern side of things, you'd like to bring some more size off the bench when Nebraska doesn't have a lot to supplement with. And he did a pretty decent job off the bench for Northwestern. But talk about how little Nebraska was able to bring in this game with just 8 players. Every Husker scored in this game, though. 5 of the 8 were in double figures as well, because you've got Keisei Tominaga with 14 points, 2 threes, and in fact, 3 different Huskers hit more than 1 3. So, yeah, the roster was small and not super available for this game, but everyone seemed to realize that this was a very important contest that they needed to add for their resume for the postseason, because they've had a couple of tough losses that are probably going to be seen by the selection committee as not great losses at the end of the year. But picking up important wins against Indiana, against Kansas State, against Purdue, and now against Northwestern, 4 very solid teams. Obviously, Purdue, a lot more than solid, probably great to excellent. Going to be a quad 1 win at the end of the year. But you could just tell in this game that the Huskers knew how important it was to get back on track, pick up another win at home, and defend the vault. It was a very team effort on the offensive end against a very tough Northwestern team. So you look at the way they did it. They held Boo Buie to just 9 points in this one. He was 2 of 15 from the field. And this is something that was odd to me, because Boo Buie has been, I should say, one of the best guards in the Big Ten Conference. He's been playing for, I think, over 5 years now. He's playing, I'm pretty sure, in year number 6 at Northwestern. So he's somebody that is not going to get flustered by any moment. And he's played in big games, a lot bigger than this. So to be able to lock him down and force a tough shooting night from him, I thought was pretty impressive. Only 2 made field goals out of 15 tries for somebody as experienced as Boo Buie is pretty crazy. And he was taking a lot of, I would say, difficult shots, maybe ill-advised late in the game against Nebraska, just trying to will his team forward. That kind of ruined his shooting night from the field even worse than it already was. But outside of Boo, you get 24 points from Brooks Barnhizer. And then you've got double figures from Ryan Langborg with 15, but no one else outside of that was really able to get any offense going. All of them in the single digits in the scoring category. And maybe the biggest thing in this game for Nebraska was that they out-rebounded Northwestern by 14. You got a 40-26 discrepancy in the rebounds in favor of Nebraska. Pretty much a complete flip from earlier in the week against Rutgers. The Nebraska had a lot of success when they had the rebounding advantage throughout this season. And again, it rears its head against Northwestern in a good way. It leads to a Nebraska win. And on the offensive glass, they did lose it by 3, but the defensive rebounding, kind of forcing those one-and-done possessions for the Wildcats, kind of confounded their shooting trouble because they couldn't get much going for their top players. And then, you're not getting an extra chance to maybe get a second look at it or kind of just an easy tip in on a layup when no one's boxing out. So Nebraska did a pretty bang-up job on the glass in this one. But by far, when they kept talking about it late in the game, when the total started to escalate, the most surprising stat, I would say, is that all of those Nebraska turnovers against Northwestern somehow didn't cost them the win. You lose the turnover margin 18-7 at home to Northwestern, a team that does a pretty good job at forcing turnovers this season. And you look at a 75-69 win still. It's just extremely surprising to see these numbers because you're giving your opponent 11 extra possessions in that discrepancy. So it's very weird to see Nebraska pull it out not only by 6 points, but in regulation as well with that sort of turnover issue. If it was maybe 18-14 or 18-13 even, you're like, okay, maybe Nebraska just did a little bit better job on the glass, got some more points off turnovers, did a better job in that category. But 18-7 is just bizarre to look at. So can't believe that Northwestern allowed Nebraska to get away with that. And again, it's just one of Nebraska's best wins in the season. You look, it's clearly behind Purdue, but it's up there with some of these other ones. I mean, big win over Michigan State, something that Nebraska hasn't done in a while earlier in the year. But then later on this season, you look at where Michigan State is at in the standings, and they're 12-7, 4-4 in the conference, just kind of middle of the pack. So it's a decent win, but Northwestern was a team that came into Nebraska with a very strong record, a very nice win, I believe, over Purdue. They were one of the only other teams that had beaten the Boilermakers. I'm almost 90% sure they were the team to knock off Purdue earlier this year. So just nice to see Nebraska return to form at home and show that this team is for real. And, they struggle on the road at this point in the year. Hopefully they can figure out some of those troubles. But when you catch Nebraska at home, there is no gimme games if you're another team in the Big Ten Conference. But going to step aside here on the show, and when I come back, we'll finally get into some Nebraska women's basketball because there were some exciting games for the Huskers this past week, and I want to break them down for you here on 90.3 KRNU and the Huskers Hoops Live YouTube channel.
For a little extra help settling in at college, look to UNL's first-year experience and transition programs. You can receive one-on-one student coaching and tutoring to get you through that tough course, or you can attend free workshops for information on stress, money, even jobs and internships. First-year experience and transition programs will assist you with academic support or general life skills to make your experience at UNL successful. Stop by First-Year Experience and Transition Programs located at 127 Love Library South.
Loving Nebraska has never been easier. Spread your Husker pride with more than a flag waving in the yard on a fall Saturday. Join the Nebraska Alumni Association and spread that Husker power. Membership costs less than $1 a week, and recent graduates get a discount. So if you are ready to continue your support and remain a part of the Sea of Red, visit HuskerAlum.org to learn more and to continue cheering on your Nebraska Cornhuskers. Again, that's HuskerAlum.org.
Exaggerating high school athletic achievements to your new college friends. Promising your new college friends that you'd a partial football scholarship to no-name state in Montana. What are these, you ask? These are the symptoms of someone with high school peaker syndrome, or HSPS. HSPS is a serious mental health condition that affects college students post-high school athletics. Thankfully, there is a cure to this crippling disease known as the UNL men's rugby team. UNL men's rugby team offers students the opportunity to relive those glory days. Tackle your HSPS head-on by visiting the rugby team's website at unlrugby.com.
The risk of an American man developing cancer in his lifetime is a little less than 1 in 2. The risk of an American woman developing cancer in her lifetime is a little more than 1 in 3, but the death rates of cancer have been declining in men and women since the early 1990s.
I relay for the support of my sister.
I relay for the support of my grandfather.
I relay for the support of my uncle.
Keep helping those in need by participating in Relay for Life. Join us for Relay for Life at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln each year to fight back against cancer. Sign up for your community event or donate at relayforlife.org.
Crazy night of basketball last night in the NBA. You've got Joel Embiid going off for 70 points. Karl Anthony Towns also went off for 60. So professional basketball going off. Had some big performances in college basketball on the women's side of things with Caitlin Clark. We'll get into that a little bit later on in the show. But now it's time to break down the Nebraska women's basketball week, as the first game of the week was against Michigan. Huskers take down the Wolverines in the Redout on last Wednesday, 62-43. And what a game this was defensively for Nebraska. Very low-scoring game on the offensive end, something that Nebraska struggled with recently of the past 4 games now, prior to Penn State in their most recent one. But it was one of the worst offensive performances from the Wolverines of the entire season. I think a lot of it had to do with Nebraska playing fantastic defense as a team on the perimeter against the likes of Layla Filia and Lauren Hansen for Michigan. Just their 2 best players had almost nothing going for the entire game because Nebraska was just absolutely locked down on the defensive end. They held Michigan to just 43 points. And yeah, offense isn't really what the Wolverines are known for on the season. It's by far their team defense. They have one of the best points allowed in the Big Ten Conference this season. They were the best, I believe, last year as a team in points allowed on defense. And in a lot of their losses recently, it was because that defense had failed them. They'd given up almost 80 points in I think 3 or 4 of their previous 4 losses. So there was thoughts that maybe if Nebraska wanted to win this game, they were going to need to put up, a big offensive performance, maybe 4 or 5 in double figures. But it ended up being a very defensive-focused game that Nebraska actually outdid Michigan, which is a huge feather in the cap to Coach Williams' team on the year. Nebraska got a very offensively aggressive Darian White from the beginning of this game. She ended up finishing with 13 points. I thought this was a fantastic performance by the Montana State transfer because she's been a very, solid and consistent presence on the court for Nebraska all year. But I thought she came out with great aggression on the offensive end. I don't know what it was, but she attacked from the get-go offensively, and her 13 points were definitely felt in a game as low-scoring as this. And Nebraska got double figures from Potts and Markowski and also Kendall Moriarty. And outside of Darian White, I think Kendall Moriarty may have eclipsed her as the biggest story from this game due to her fantastic defense off the bench against Michigan's best players. And she was also very effective in spots on the offensive end. I mean, you've got the early three-pointer, you've got the and one in the first half, 4 for 7 overall from the field. And it was very clear that Coach Williams was a fan of this performance by Kendall Moriarty, because the times where she would, in other games usually step out and get a rest and bring in some of these other Nebraska players, she was getting some extended minutes. And off the bench, Kendall Moriarty ended up playing 18 minutes to lead the bench unit. and she played more minutes than Maddie Kroll, who was kind of that fifth person in the starting lineup that night, only 2 points on 4 shots. So Kendall Moriarty really brought it on the offensive end, something that I think Husker fans would love to see a little bit more, because she's got a pretty solid jumper from outside, and she's going to bring the defense on any given night, and maybe a little bit more aggressiveness on the offensive end could take her to the next level. Jazz Shelley, somewhat quiet in this game, just 8 points on 5 shots, but again, in a low-scoring game, some of these numbers are going to be felt a lot more than in a 80 to 75 game. She had 6 assists. She was very important in Nebraska's offense, getting that generation and making sure the looks offensively were the best that Nebraska could get. A ton of no-look passes, some beautiful outlets down the court in transition. So I thought she did a pretty good job moving the ball. She Nebraska as a team, just 17% from three-point range and less than 40% from the field. But Moriarty, Shelley, and White were kind of leading the way. The only Huskers to hit three-pointers in this one. So some would say it's a lucky win, but I think overall the defense is what generated the luck, in air quotes there, in this ballgame. So very nice win over Michigan, a team that just beat, not that long ago, Ohio State. And we'll talk about Ohio State and the way they were able to take down Iowa a little bit later on in the show. But next game up on the schedule for the Huskers women's basketball team was Penn State, and they fell back down into another loss, and that's where you see this high-scoring game once again, 82-73, a 9-point loss on the road to the Nittany Lions this past Sunday. Offense, again, just in a much better spot than the last 3 or 4 games, but you get 20 points from Ashley Owusu for the Nittany Lions to kind of just put them over the edge in this one. And Nebraska did get 16 from Markowski, you get 12 from Shelley and White each, but everyone else in single-digit scoring, just it wasn't enough. And maybe if, one other player is able to have a big-time performance and get 12 or 15 points, maybe Nebraska's a little bit closer. They're able to force a little bit of tension or stress on Penn State that leads to a couple more mistakes. Just wasn't in the cards in this game. But kind of an interesting breakdown because Nebraska out-rebounded Penn State, and they had more bench points in this one as well. Usually when you see one or both of those for a single team in a matchup, it's sometimes the other way. And sometimes it will be Nebraska doing it because, 2 or 3 players in the starting lineup a lot of the time aren't enough to carry your team when your opponent is getting it from all throughout the roster, and they're also getting extra chances because they're out rebounding you. So kind of interesting that Penn State was able to overcome both of those things to get an important win on their resume, because Nebraska at the end of the season, I think, is going to be a pretty impressive win when you look at those postseason resumes for some of these teams, like, some of these losses on the Nebraska schedule. But you've got scoring from Owusu, Shea, I think it's Shizki, as you pronounce it, I believe, 17 points for her, ended up just being enough to take down this Nebraska team. Penn State outscored the Huskers by 19 in quarters 2 and 3 combined. So that middle portion of the game is where the Nittany Lions were kind of just able to escape Nebraska in this one. Just, first quarter was pretty close. It was well, I can pull it up for you. I believe it was tied after the first quarter, and then, to finish the first half, Penn State just went on a nice offensive run. Yeah, it was 12-12 at the end of the first quarter, but then a 24-14 advantage in the second quarter for Penn State, 28-19 in the third quarter. So that's a tough middle section to overcome as a team. You're heading into the fourth quarter, losing the last 2 quarters by, what did I just say? It was almost 20 points. So, that's a tough total for any team to overcome. I don't care if it's Nebraska or one of the top teams ranked in the country. it's tough to overcome a 20-point deficit in the past two quarters to finish up a game on a night where offense was there, but it wasn't, it wasn't something Penn State wasn't bringing to the table either. They were having a good offensive night as well. So Nebraska falls once again. They fall to 13-6, but still a pretty solid team in the Big Ten overall record. They're going to have to work on some of these Big Ten wins. You go 1-1 in the conference this past week. They've got a massive one coming up against Iowa. And, we're going to step aside here on the show, but come back. I want to talk a little bit about that Ohio State and Iowa game and just some of the other teams around the conference in men's and women's basketball and kind of just look around where Nebraska fits here on 90.3 KRNU in the Huskers Hoops Live YouTube channel.
Imagine never being able to drive, to watch TV, or even read Harry Potter. Reading is essential to our lives. City Impact Reading Center helps Lincoln Public Elementary Schools boost their students' reading scores by getting all students at or above their grade's reading level. Each week, volunteers of all ages go sit and read with students. You can help a student gain an important life skill and help change their future. If you're looking for some rewarding volunteer experiences, please visit their website at cityimpact.org.
For a little extra help settling in at college, look to UNL's first-year experience and transition programs. You can receive one-on-one student coaching and tutoring to get you through that tough course, or you can attend free workshops for information on stress, money, even jobs and internships. First-year experience and transition programs will assist you with academic support or general life skills to make your experience at UNL successful. Stop by First-Year Experience and Transition Programs located at 127 Love Library South.
This is Logan.
What's up, everyone?
Logan's been going to UNL for 4 years now.
I know everything that's going on here.
Logan is somewhat informed about campus events.
Like the football game, and I think there's some kind of election, I think.
Don't be like Logan. Pick up a copy of the Daily Nebraskan or follow them on Facebook and Twitter. Not only can you be updated with events on campus, you can read profiles on some of the most interesting people around Lincoln and get unique coverage found nowhere else, because keeping up with the news is one of the most important things a student can do.
Do you want to make a difference for kids, for people in poverty, for the environment? Join AmeriCorps and get things done right here in Nebraska. With lots of different programs to choose from, you can serve in your area of passion and develop your skills while earning money to pay for college or to repay student loans. All programs are filling AmeriCorps positions to start September 1st. Learn more and apply at serve.nebraska.gov. Sponsored by Serve Nebraska. Aired with the Nebraska Broadcasters Association and this station.
Getting involved on campus, meeting new friends, and networking for the future can seem scary, but Scarlet Guard makes it easy for both graduate and undergraduates. Social events help students connect with others around campus, while the professional events help students network with alumni from around the globe. Possibilities within Scarlet Guard are endless, so join today. Go to huskeralum.org/Scarlet Guard or contact the Nebraska Alumni Association. Students today, alumni tomorrow, Huskers forever.
Big Ten basketball season pretty underway at this point in late January. Folks, we're coming up on March in, I think, just over a week from now. So we're deep into the season at this point, and wins are becoming more and more important as teams begin to separate themselves or draw themselves closer to the teams above them. And we'll take a look around the Big Ten standings in men's and women's basketball. We'll start with the men's side of things. Wisconsin still holding out at the top. 14-4 overall record, 6-1 in the conference. One of those wins being against Nebraska in Madison, Wisconsin. So that's a big win for them, and they're continuing to have a great season. Purdue right below them at that second spot at 6-2 in the conference. One of those losses being against Nebraska in Lincoln, 17-2 overall record, though. So Purdue is not going anywhere at the top of the conference. Illinois is still up there with a 14-4 record. Northwestern still ahead of Nebraska just because they're 4-3 in the Big Ten conference games. Nebraska, though, at that 5 spot in the Big Ten standings with a 4-4 record, tied with Indiana and Michigan State. But the 14-5 record with wins over Indiana and Michigan State are really where Nebraska is able to take that tiebreaker, because they're 4-0 at home in the conference, but 0-4 on the road in the conference. You've got Minnesota, you've got Iowa, you've got Rutgers, and there's another one that is fleeting my mind for some reason right now. I don't want to think about it, but strong start for Nebraska. You look down in the Big Ten standing, though. You got Ohio State at 3-4 in the conference, but they've got a 13-5 record. Very strong start to the season for Ohio State, and they're coming up tonight in Lincoln against Coach Hoiberg's Nebraska squad. So definitely got to keep an eye out on them. Minnesota has fallen 12-6. They're 3-4 in the conference. That's one that really could have helped Nebraska stand out just a little bit more in the conference. Could have been potentially 5-3. You're looking at maybe being up at that 4 spot ahead of Northwestern with a 15-4 record. Just a pretty unfortunate game for Nebraska looking back on it. You've got Maryland at 3-5 in the conference. They're near the bottom 4 in the Big Ten with an 11-8 record. They're trying to establish themselves here in the middle of the season, and they're coming up this weekend in Maryland for Nebraska. So the Huskers are playing tonight in Lincoln against the Buckeyes. They head on the road against the Terps in one of the toughest places to play for an opposing team. You've got a very strong Maryland home presence. We'll break that down a little bit more in a couple of minutes, but that's just kind of a taste of the Big Ten standings in men's basketball. On the women's side of things, you've got Iowa and Indiana in a tight race for that top spot in the conference, both 7-1 in Big Ten play. Iowa with 2 more wins on the year, 18-2 as opposed to 16-2 for the Indiana Hoosiers. But those are 2 teams that I'm confident in picking in almost every single game this year. 2 of the best teams, not only in the Big Ten, but in the country. They are tough to overtake. But then you've got Ohio State at 6-1 in the conference, 15-3 record overall, and a big, big win over Iowa in this past weekend. You get a huge performance from Caitlin Clark. She goes for 40 points. They said on the broadcast it was her 11th career 40-point game. Just ridiculous stuff from Caitlin Clark this season in her final year with the Hawkeyes, and I'm sure she is looking at this year as a potential national championship season. But the Buckeyes in their home arena are able to take down the Iowa Hawkeyes. Cody McMahon goes off for a double-double. I think she had like 33 and 15 in that game. Just ridiculous stuff, but you get some help from other players like J.C. Sheldon and Rebecca Mikala-Shakova hitting threes out of the front court. So huge win for Ohio State. They sit at the 3 spot in the Big Ten right now. And then right beneath them, you've got Nebraska at 5-3 in the conference with a 13-6 record, firmly in that 4 spot in the Big Ten currently. But you look just below them, Minnesota, Penn State, Michigan, Maryland, all at 4-3 in the conference, kind of on Nebraska's heels. Very similar overall record, very close in the conference play. So Nebraska's got a tough set of games ahead of them, with Iowa coming up. Only 1 game this week, and that's on the road, and that's against the top team potentially in the country. And you've got all these teams that are so close to matching Nebraska or overtaking them. So this is a week that Nebraska, if they lose, it could really move them down in the Big Ten standings for at least a week. And Nebraska might be able to win and vault themselves up. They could lose, but then get a couple of wins later on and work themselves back up into this top 4. But I think if you want to position yourself for postseason play, if you can finish the year in that top 5 spot in the Big Ten, I think you've got a good chance of getting at that at-large bid for the March Madness tournament. But we got a couple minutes left on the show. Let's preview some of these games coming up this week for Nebraska. You've got Ohio State tonight in Lincoln for men's basketball. The Buckeyes 13-5, like I said, 3-4 in the conference, like I just said, but they have a win over the number 17 Alabama Crimson Tide earlier in the season. They've got a win over UCLA not too long ago, just over a month ago on December 16th. Wins over West Virginia on December 30th. So they have some pretty solid wins, some name brand wins on their resume so far this year. And one of the reasons that they are down so low in the conference is they're in a bit of a rough patch right now. Nebraska may be catching Ohio State at a good time because they're 2-3 in their last 5 games. They lost to Michigan, they lost to Wisconsin, and Indiana in those 3 losses. They had a win over Rutgers on January 3rd, and then they didn't win a game until this past Saturday against Penn State, where they won 79-67. So solid win for them there. But this is an Ohio State team that's still figuring things out, kind of floating around at that, bottom half to middle of the pack standing in the Big Ten. So this is a dangerous game for Nebraska. They play well at home. They are undefeated at home in the conference with some pretty impressive wins. Obviously, Purdue, you've got Indiana, you've got Michigan State, and also Northwestern. But this could be one that sours that reputation of home dominance in the Big Ten because Ohio State, while they have got talent, and I'll talk about it in a second, this would be one that would hurt a lot in that home resume. You've got Bruce Thornton back on the team this year, leading Ohio State with 16 points per game, over 41% from the field. It's going to be a huge matchup on the wing for Nebraska to deal with. You've got guys like Jamarcus Lawrence. I imagine C.J. Wilcher, Bryce Williams will probably draw that defensive matchup. Those are the main 3 guys I'm imagining that Coach Hoiberg will throw at him. Then you've got Jamison Battle in the front court. Fans will remember things that he did against Nebraska while he was with Minnesota the past few years. He's their second leading scorer this year. So you remember those 3 games that Nebraska played against Minnesota, 2 in regular season, 1 in that Big Ten tournament game last year. Jamison Battle was not bashful from the field at all against the Huskers. He was launching from 3-point range, so definitely something to watch out for. I think those are the 2 main matchups that will worry me in this game. Jamison Battle, obviously, one of the top shooting big men for Ohio State out of that front court. Rink Mast and Josiah Alec, they will need to communicate well with their teammates defensively if they want to limit the open shots that Jamison Battle gets. I'll live with him taking those off dribble contested threes. He hits a couple of those. He's a good shooter, but you want to try your best to limit him just because of either miscommunication or just physical exhaustion late in the game. You want to try to limit him just getting open catch and shoot threes because that's where he'll get into a rhythm to the point where he's hitting a lot more contested jumpers than he usually does. So I think if Nebraska can force him to take those tough shots and limit the ones where he's just looking at an open rim, uncontested, no hands in his face, Nebraska might have some success tonight against the Buckeyes. But coming up this weekend, you've got Maryland, 11-8 overall, 9-2 record at home, which is where they've been their best, just like last year. They had a historically good home record last year. They went 16-1 at home in 2023, but just 2-9 on the road last season. So maybe Nebraska can try to be that diamond in the rough, if you will, of the resume at home for Maryland. It's just, there's something about that arena that they just play so much better at. And it's kind of been a trend again this year for the Terps. So Nebraska's running into another tough Big Ten road scenario where they haven't won in the conference on the road this season. So that almost puts a little bit more pressure on picking up the win tonight at home against Ohio State, because I think you have to go at least 1-1 in this week if you want to stay at the top of the Big Ten at this point in the season. On to the women's side of things. Talked about Iowa coming up. This game's in Iowa City, Nebraska traveling later on this weekend. They just lost to Ohio State, just their second loss of the year. They had the early season loss to Kansas State, scored only 58 points in that one, but then they got their receipt just 10 days later with a victory against the Wildcats. Kind of a weird thing. You don't usually see a non-conference opponents play twice in the same year, especially that close together, but that just is how the schedule turned out. But you look at the ranked teams that Iowa has beat so far this year in women's basketball. Number 8, Virginia Tech, 80-76. Number 16, Kansas State, 77-70. And then number 14, Indiana on January 13th, 84-57. 84-57. One of the best teams in the country just getting demolished by Iowa. Caitlin Clark, the biggest reason for that. Almost 32 points per game. That average actually got bumped up after this recent loss to Ohio State because of her 45 points, 18 of them from the three-point range. So Caitlin Clark is just a problem. There's no other way to put it. She had 14 free throws out of 16 in that game, 7 assists, 2 steals, she's 1 block. She's just the all-encompassing basketball player for Iowa. She does everything. And she's great at drawing contact, too, if anyone saw that fall that she took in the court rush against Ohio State. Not sure how I feel about that one. I don't think there was much going on there, but it's going to be Jazz Shelley and Caitlin Clark in the backcourt. That's the matchup to watch. Shelley had 12 points last game against Penn State. 12 shots, though, so the efficiency is it's all right. But if there was one game for this season to cement Jazz Shelley's legacy as one of the best guards in Nebraska women's basketball history, it would be heading into Iowa City and somehow outplaying Caitlin Clark on her home floor. You think back to last year's game in Iowa City, Jazz Shelley had just 10 points on 13 shots in a game high for Nebraska, 38 minutes, 53 seconds on the floor. So she was exhausted, I'm sure, by the end of this game, but 1 for 7 from three-point range in that one. In a game that finished 80-76 for a win for Iowa, it shows what Shelley can be in a difference maker for the Huskers in that game. You know, she hits a couple more of those, Nebraska maybe wins and picks up a huge win on the road. So it's going to be a fun one. I'm very excited for this upcoming week of basketball. Stick with us on KRNU. We'll be covering the Ohio State game today from PBA. And thanks for joining me tonight, or this morning, I should say, on Huskers Hoops Live YouTube channel and on 90.3 KRNU. We'll continue to be bringing these episodes to you every Tuesday morning, 8 to 9 a.m. Central Time. But with that being said, go Big Red.
.3 KRNU